And continuing to paint our party sorcerer Dazan. Last time we worked on fabrics. We did the cloak, we did the tunic, we did the pants. So lots of good color applied, contrasting to the green on the inner cloak. Really brought out the reds for those layers. Now we're going to focus on some of the details. See here we're starting with boots, and I'm going to do the belt and the pouches with the same leather pattern. This is a triad of colors from Reaper, all designed for leather, and depending which way you take it, I'm starting with just a leather color, and then I'll do a tanned leather, which is a little bit lighter, and then a white leather, blending in between. And we're going to use that for many of the accessories as well as his boots. And Dazan, his boots have definitely seen some walking as he moved from the Shadowlands after he discovered some facts about his background and kind of who he is, where he's from. He's adventuring to find a portal to his home planet, or his home realm, and caught up with the party in a desert encounter. He kind of helped them, they helped him, so he joined the party and has been traveling with them ever since. Definitely very powerful in his arcane abilities. He's finished off a young red dragon along with a lot of other foes, and continues to bring a good array of spells and power to the party, and a very interesting character. Player came up with some great concepts on this guy. So, trying to do some good justice as I gift this miniature to the player, wanted to incorporate the favorite color, which is green, you can tell by the base, and then contrast up. Now it's about details. We've got to make these details really stand out. Now one way to do that is if we were to blackline around these accessories, which give it a really good clear break from color to color, so your eyes can see it really well. Generally, I don't paint with those types of breaks or those paint lines, and so especially for tabletop use, I don't utilize that. I try to pick colors that have good contrast between them so that they stand out on their own without having to blackline, just because it gives it a little more of a cartoony look. And this campaign, most of the campaigns I run are really serious, so I try to just stick with contrasting colors to build that differentiation with. And of course, slow going with that first layer, we've got to make sure it's nice and opaque. Good coverage, multiple layers of thin paint. That way we have a base to build up from. Does take a little bit of time. You can tell we've sped up the video. I do not paint this fast. This video has been sped up so that we can see some progress on the miniature in a timely fashion, just in case you're only able to watch this for half an hour or less. That's my goal. I want these to be in bite-sized pieces, but I also want you to be able to go back and reference what we started with and where we came to. With Dazan, of course, the fabrics on this character are the most prominent feature, because it's a magic user, doesn't have armor, doesn't have different types of weapons or shields, anything like that. So we've got to pay a lot of attention to the fabrics. And when we finish out accessories, we're going to accent some of the fabric a little bit. I'm not going to give any spoilers. We'll save that till the end. But this paint job here for this session, we're going to focus on the leather accessories and the hair. And part of the hair will also be the base of the headband. I'm not going to complete the headband, but I'm going to do the base of the headband It's because it's so interwoven with the hair a little bit. I want to make sure that we get it in place and kind of that base coat painted out so that we can see it as a reminder of things to come. But for the leather, just starting with that leather color and then starting to do smaller highlights with the tanned leather. And these boots, when you get up close to the miniature, you can see it's almost got like gaiters over boots. You can really see it on the right foot of the miniature. But I'm painting it as though they're just tall boots with a flap rather than a gaiter. Just because it's just for tabletop, it's just an enjoyable piece for the player to have, and I just want to be able to do something that is good enough to be used on a table and not take too exorbitant amount of time. Here in the side pouch there's a book. I contemplated painting the cover of the book before the leather, but because I'm using a triad, it's easy to go back when I do paint that book to just touch up should I put any of the paint from the book on the pouch. Because I'm not mixing a funky color or anything, it'll be easy enough if I make a mistake. I can quickly just grab one of the colors and touch it up so that I'm not worried about the cover of the book, which, as we do the accessories, will also have a very unique color just for adding more contrast to the miniature. As I mentioned in the last video, the one thing I want to avoid is for this to look like Christmas. I don't want the red and green to look Christmassy, which is why we use duller colors, and looking at contrasting colors to the green that are a little bit different than just red. So that's why the orange shirt and the brown pants still has red tones to it, but it's different and will stand off of that green really well on its own. But for the accessories, just smaller and smaller areas. As I'm working on the leather, as I start highlighting up, rather than looking for where the sunlight is going to be hitting, I'm looking at where is that leather going to wear. Because if you've ever played with tanned leather, you know the more rub it gets, the more worn it gets, the lighter in color it gets to where it can get to a white color, especially depending on the leather itself. So just smaller and smaller areas getting lighter and lighter in tone until we get to the leather white highlights. Just a good triad color of leathers, working on all those different accessories and boots. Now, one of the things with this sculpt, because it's a magic user, a lot of times I've seen this one painted with gray hair and beard. I'm going to really avoid that, and we're almost finished with this leather and moving to the hair. But because the player is fairly young and the party's characters are all fairly young, including Dazan, I am going to do a dark hair rather than gray. You can see if I were to leave it gray, it just doesn't add anything to the miniature and it doesn't like tell any type of a story. So I am actually going to go with a very dark hair, and that way it's going to frame the face really well without dark lining, and it's going to stand out from the fabric really bold colors. So I start out with a black. However, you can tell it's been on my wet palette for a bit. It's very thin. So here in a moment I do have to add some fresh black onto my wet palette and reapply the black, just because this is too thin to get that good opaque base color. But it is going to frame out the face really well, which, especially when we get the beard on there, is going to help the highlights in the face stand out from the shadows of the face a little bit better. So overall, your color choices are going to impact the color choices next to them as well. You've Got to be thinking about that as you are picking up your brushes and shaking up your paint bottles. And this one here, some of the hair is actually kind of challenging to paint because it's super flowy. I call it a hippie do. And it's got a lot of motion and volume and mousse put into it. Farrah Fawcett would be proud. But it does make it a little more challenging to paint because it's so flowy. Getting the brush into some of the different curved angles can be a little challenging. So you got to take a little bit of your own time. Make sure that you're getting all of the areas that are hair colored with your base coat. And he's got kind of a Fu Manchu mustache that flows into the beard. Got to make sure we get that painted up and then into the beard. And in the beard there's actually like banding in there, and that I'm going to have match the headband. Still haven't decided if we're going to try to do something Karate Kid or not, but we will definitely make that beard band match his headband. And just trying to make sure that we get all of the hair, all of the beard, and all of the luscious locks that this miniature sports. And give that plenty of time to dry. But you can see that starts to frame out the face pretty well. From the highlights that we put on there, on the robe, that black kind of stands out pretty well too. So highlighting black is also pretty challenging. The biggest mistake a lot of people do is only using white to highlight black. I do not like doing that because that just leads to salt and pepper, which if that's the effect you want to do, that works great and very effective. It's also good for things like cast iron or iron armor, things like that. Black to white works great because as you're blending, you've got lots of grays in between. But I actually do blues, and I start out with a blue liner and then move into ashen blue, and then ashen blue with white, and then just a dot of pure white where the light would be reflecting off the hair. And because this figure's hair is so flowy and just all over the place, this one's a little bit more challenging. You can't just do the crown and the tips. You really got to look at some of the volume pieces. Where are they bending? How would the light play off of those? So spending a little bit of time thinking about that light on the hair is super important before you paint a figure like this. It's because you want it to look kind of real. Really highlight some of the details that the sculptor has put into the figure. And the good thing about using fresh thin paints is they do dry pretty fast. So with that hair, I'll be able to start putting on the highlights pretty quick. And this here for the book, I decided to go ahead and do the pages in an off-white. This is just a linen white. This is the same thing I'm going to use for that beard band and that headband. It's because I am leaning a little bit kind of Karate Kid and thinking about Daniel's headband with the white and the red lotus and little bits of black on it. So an off-white, just so I can lay it in. Now we're not going to finish it. We're not going to do any highlights or decoration on this yet. This is just putting a base coat on the pages as well as that headband and the neckband or the beard band, just so we have good definition of where those are going to be at. That'll help us actually pick out some of the details in the hair so we can highlight more effectively. So for me, it's a means to an end. We'll come back and do the headband and the beard band details when we do some of the other accessories. And it's also just a great way to get some color on that paper of the book, so that again, when we go through and do the book cover, we've already got kind of a start. We can play with some colors, see what's going to stand out the best to separate the tan, the leather, to the white pages. So now we're just laying in some of the shadow colors, or highlight colors actually. This is just blue liner. I'm pretty generous with it, but I leave black for the deepest shadows and just apply the highlight color where I feel the light would be reacting the most with this Farrah Fawcett hair, which I do not have. I am envious of. But overall, you can see how that's framed the face now. It's a little more challenging to see on the video, especially when it's further away. But it really shows the contrasts in the cheeks and around the eyes that I thought turned out pretty decent. Really separates that flesh tone from the red. So it works pretty good. You can see there's less of that separation on the sleeves to the hands. So the hands, even though they have a lot of detail and the same coloring, it's harder for your eyes to separate those colors. So they almost get lost a little bit. And we could augment them and separate them a little bit more with some black lining, but again, I think that looks a little too cartoony for on the table play. So we're going to leave it as is. And just continuing highlights as we start blending that blue liner with ashen blue. The highlights get smaller and smaller. Generally here is where I'm starting to pick out individual hairs. These are kind of carved like clumps and not like individual strands of hair. So it's a little bit more challenging, but again, follow the curves, think about where your light source is, and how that plays off of the hair. You can also go online and just look at good references for black hair. You'll see that the majority of them are very just dark hair. As they get up to highlights, they tend to have either blue or red tone highlights, but they're very dark until they get to the lightest point where the light is hitting them. So the blues are a more natural black color. Reds are usually more dyed color, or they've got recessive red hair genes or blonde genes that just come through the hair in tone once it plays or reacts with the light. But just smaller and smaller bits as we continue to move up the highlights up to the brightest point where light would be reflecting off the individual strands. Smaller and smaller bits. This is where a lot of people want to just slap on some paint and call it good. Don't hesitate. Spend the time. Your miniatures will be worth it. When you see them on the table, they look fantastic. And just hitting fine details. Hair is one of the most challenging things, especially when it's solid colors like black. There are times I almost wish I had more players who had rainbow colored hair, just because it's fun to play with and see it on a mini. And that's this week's progress on Dazan. Now next week I'm going to work on, there's a sword in the boot, as well as sword, belt, and buckle. The book, the headband and beard band. I want to do some details on both of those. And then I may throw on some trim around the cloak. We will see what next week brings when we wet the brush then. Take it easy.